Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we are sharing our top 10 tips for working and studying for the bar exam. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about 10 things to think about if you're going to be working and studying for the bar exam. And we're seeing more and more people working and studying for the bar exam in the last few years, whether it's as a repeat taker or as a first-time taker who needs to study and work for whatever reason. For example, I actually took my second bar exam while I was working. So I'd passed in Massachusetts. I was admitted there when I was clerking. And then I moved to a firm in San Francisco. So, not unreasonably, they thought that I should be barred in California. So I had to take the California bar while I was working at a large firm, which was not very much fun.
Well, I mean, you had such an abundance of free time, right? While you were working at that large firm?
Exactly. So, I mean, the reality of it is, of course, I had the best of intentions, but the reality of it is I basically took 3 weeks off before the exam. I was incredibly sick the first week, so I literally couldn't get out of bed. Although one afternoon I had to get out of bed because the firemen came and banged on my door yelling, "Get out right now. The house next to you is on fire." So it was a pretty hectic bar study season, but I did somehow manage to pass California basically in a couple of weeks. Not advisable.
Yeah, exactly. Alison's story is not something you should strive for, especially the fire part.
Yeah, definitely when you're in the middle of bar study and you're sick and you hear the knock on the door and you look out your back patio to see, literally, I mean, I'll never forget, I just saw black smoke pouring out of the building next to me. And this is San Francisco. They're all wooden buildings.
Yeah.
And I literally had that moment of like, what do I take with me if my house is getting ready to burn down and I'm studying for the bar? And I took my laptop and I think I took one book and I left and went to the cafe across the street to see if my house was going to burn down, which thankfully it did not.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty disturbing. So hopefully you don't have that similar type of crisis. Hopefully you get more time off of work and there's no burning buildings.
Right. So Lee, what do we suggest to people who are not totally crazy about how to pass working and studying?
All right. Well, the first thing is don't be like Alison and start early if possible. So when you think about working and studying, that really means that you're going to be typically studying part-time. And so when I talk to folks about this, I want you to think about the fact that full-time study is about 40 hours a week for 8 to 10 weeks. And most part-time studiers are going to be able to study 20 to 25 hours a week, maybe for 20 weeks. That's if you're, working full-time and studying a little bit on the weekends and in the evenings. Many people who are working and studying also will try to start by studying part-time and then move to full-time, even if it's just for a few weeks. So it seems that especially law jobs will oftentimes give you the option to take some either paid time off or even unpaid leave as you get closer to the exam to give you time for full-time study.
Which I think is extremely valuable. I mean, if your job is willing to let you take time off, even if it's unpaid, I think you need to try to do that.
Yeah, I think that that's true because you're going to get your best brain to study. And one of the hard things about studying part-time is that you're studying in the evenings and the weekends when you're tired because your job is typically hard. So if you're only studying when you're exhausted, you're not getting your best brain. But if you can study full-time for even a week, that allows you to have your best brain to do that memorization, heavy lifting, and you're likely going to retain a lot more and feel like you're much better prepared for the exam.
Yeah, and obviously people who are trying to study, at work, at night, every weekend, if you're going to be studying for, say, 4 months, you've got to really think seriously about the burnout issues too. So it might be better to concentrate that time, take some time off, be more fresh, and not be so burned out by the time you take the exam.
Yep. One of the other things that I like people to think about if they're going to study part-time is using tools like Bar, which is something we've talked about on this podcast, because they will give you access months before the test. So if you're taking a February test, usually they'll give you access to the February kind of course starting in August. So it's very easy to start doing some of this prep early because your tools will give you access, even if you're not getting access to some of your other bar review providers. I think that's why a lot of students look at tutoring programs like ours that are more customized, because we can start at any point and create you a study schedule that will start at any point. And that's something you want to think about as well when you're picking how you're going to be supported for the bar exam, is who's going to be able to support you with the schedule that you have.
Yeah, exactly. Because you've got to be realistic, and obviously things come up. Another thing I sometimes suggest to people, if they're going to start studying early, is to really be strategic about it. So, maybe you focus on the performance test and do that because you don't have to memorize anything. And then I do think working on the MBE is only going to help you because that's a great way to learn the law. And if you use something like Bar, the more questions you do, the better sense you're going to have of how you're doing on those questions. So there's really no downside to starting to do them now.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Our second tip is if you can't start early, then we want you to consider skipping the next administration of the exam. Wah, wah. So typically we don't recommend skipping administrations of the exam because you forget the law and all of the stuff that you studied for the last administration. And sometimes it can really, cause you to feel like you have to start doing work over again, duplicating work that you've already done. But the reality is there are costs to just sitting for a test. There are financial costs. It's not cheap to sit for a bar exam that you're not prepared for. You may pay for a tutor or some other sort of bar prep provider that, you can't even use because you're not going to have time to study. And you might just be too burned out and not be able to prepare correctly. And any failure is going to weigh on you. Even when I talk to people who say, I know I am not going to pass, they are still heavily disappointed when they do not get that notification that they are on the pass list. And so there's an emotional weight to that too. I like to prevent people from having to fail. It's just not
right.
It's just not good.
And I think sometimes I've talked to people who failed and then they were really emotionally devastated and tried to make themselves study immediately again. And, almost spiraled really into like pretty serious depression and things like that. And it's like, you should have just postponed. There was no reason to put yourself through that because obviously they failed again.
Yep.
So, now you failed twice. So, I think a lot of this podcast is probably about being realistic, but you've got to be realistic and really assess your chances. And if your chances don't look high for whatever reason, really give serious thought to just postponing it.
Yep. We were talking a bit about this on another podcast that we recently did on looking at your score report if you failed. But when you are trying to evaluate what you need to do to pass, oftentimes one of those decision points is being able to hire the help that you need to get over the hump. And sometimes a quick turnaround with the next administration isn't going to allow you to get your financial ducks in a row. And I have seen over and over again, folks decide, I'm going to take off an administration. I'm going to save some money. I'm going to work. I'm going to get my life in order so I can take some time off, so I can, pay a tutor or get the bar resources that I need and really have a chance at passing. And then they do end up passing. So sometimes you just need to say, I got to be a little bit patient to get my ducks in a row.
Yeah, I don't think there's any point in forcing yourself to sit for a test that realistically you're just not going to be prepared for.
Yeah.
Like your odds of passing are not high. It's going to add to the anxiety. Just, don't do it.
Yep.
Along those lines, I keep being the be realistic person. But number 3 is you've really got to make sure you're being realistic about your work schedule. And I know for me personally, it's one thing to think like, I'll study after my 12 hours a day that I'm working at my firm job. That is probably not going to happen. So I think you've got to think, do I really have this 40-hour or less job per week that has regular hours that I know I can study 2 or 3 nights a week and I know I'm not going to be working on weekends? I think honestly, I might have even been at trial at some point when I was supposed to be studying. Just like that's not going to happen.
Yeah. It can be very hard. And sometimes even your job will say, sure, we can limit your hours so you have plenty of time to study. It can be, everybody has good intentions, but you have to be super realistic. And over again have I seen folks have to come to me and say, I got a new assignment for a job. I have a new presentation. I have to travel for work. And it really derails their bar study.
Yeah, I think the travel thing can really get you. It's one thing to think like, oh, I'll study on the airplane. But again, like you're probably going to have other work to do on that airplane. You're going to be exhausted if you're traveling constantly. You're not going to be retaining any information. It's going to be adding to your stress. You'll probably start doing worse at work, which is then you're going to add to your stress because you feel like you need to work more. So I think, you being realistic and also getting your employer on board with whatever needs to happen. And oftentimes people just you need to go to your employer with a plan.
Right.
And then set some boundaries around, we talked about this. Like I can't really take on additional overtime right now because I'm studying for the bar, remember?
Right.
And they may or may not accommodate that. And then you may or may not have to decide if you should take the next exam or wait.
Yep. Also, your risks increase of getting sick, getting burned out. You likely will have to eliminate all of your self-care, which, all of these create problems. And then you end up missing your study time. You have increased anxiety because you're not sleeping. Maybe you're going to get sick, especially if you're taking a February administration. It's cold and flu season. So people get really, really sick if they're not able to take care of yourself. So, these are things that you really have to weigh whether or not you can, get it all together to sit for the exam. Again, I think it's better to delay than it is to have an unrealistic situation for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I think another thing that you have to think about, our tip number 4, is to make sure you can find high quality study blocks of time. Now, for most people, these are going to be weekends, but I think that you really need 6 to 8 hour days on the weekends to actually get some serious stuff done. Because during the week, I think, hopefully you can get a solid 2 hour to 3 hour block to study, but I think it's unrealistic to try and get more. What do you think?
I agree. I sometimes talk to people who are considering tutoring and they say, oh, well, I get out of my job at 5 or 6 and then I'm going to study 4 hours every night. And then I'm going to study every weekend. I mean, that sounds like, okay, great. But that's, again, not realistic.
Right.
I would rather that you block off time on the weekends to study, whether it's a half day or maybe one full day, one half day. And then maybe you study a couple of hours at night twice a week. If that's sustainable for you, that's going to be better than just getting totally burned out and trying to study excessively during the week when realistically, you've got tons of other stuff to do and you're not going to be at your freshest.
Yeah. Another thing that I think folks can kind of take a misstep around their schedule is sometimes they're like, well, I can find 3 hours a day. And that means they're just like grabbing an hour here and an hour there. And I think usually that doesn't really allow you to get very much done. I have seen students use lunch hours effectively, especially if they want to sit down and do some MBE questions. So, you could do a 1 hour set of MBE questions and then review them after work or something like that. And I think that's fine. That's kind of the beauty of a tool like Adapt-A-Bar. It's all online. You can just log in, do your set, log out. It'll track all that information for you. But most of the time you want, by the time you get all set up and get all your stuff out and you get your water and you set up your desk and you open your books and you remember what you're studying, if you just have an hour, not that much is going to get done.
And you still have to eat lunch because you can't not eat,
Well, yes, not eating is not a good plan.
So, you're trying to get food and you're eating. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's possible to use those in between times, but I don't think that should be your primary study time.
I've seen it work well when people decide to go into the office early or stay late to study so they don't, end up going home super late and starting, especially if you have a commute. Sometimes it can be more effective to stay in the office from 5 to 7 and then go home. Maybe even the commute won't take as long. But
yeah, exactly.
Just make sure you
feed yourself. It's a good place to study. If you're going to do that. Exactly. Food, self-care before you get started. But that can be effective because people say, well, my office is quiet. I don't really have a library or something to go to the way that I did when I was originally doing a bar prep program, or I was still, could study at my law school. I might have distractions at home, all these kind of things. So as long as you're not going to be interrupted by work responsibilities and people understand that really you're actually off work, even though you are physically at your office, I think that can work if you're not too tired after being at work all day.
Right. Something that people often bring up to me is using car commute time effectively. A lot of people think that just listening to lectures in your car really counts as study time, but unless you're an auditory learner, unfortunately, just passively listening to lectures doesn't actually make you learn anything. I know it's such bad news. So
yeah. And also, like, you don't want to crash your car because you're so focused on your audio lecture.
Yeah. So although it can't hurt, maybe you'll hear a tidbit there, here and there that you retain. It's passive, not active learning. And I almost think you're better off like listening to a podcast that makes you happy and getting to kind of blow off some steam than you are to.
Yeah, or like the happy music, Spotify list or something in your half-hour commute where at least when you get home, you've kind of reset your brain, you're in a good mood, versus just like the drudgery of listening to, someone drone on about Civ Pro in your car for an hour. Sounds kind of like a nightmare.
Yeah, it does. Okay. We've talked about being realistic about work commitments. Our tip number 5 is to be realistic about life commitments. So do you have a kid or a dog or a significant other? Do you take care of aging parents? The problem is life doesn't stop for the bar exam, as much as we wish it would. So you've got to really evaluate what are your known responsibilities and how they're going to balance with bar prep. Especially if you have a family, you need to be very conscious about how you're going to balance your study time and provide an opportunity for you to do focused study, especially on the weekends if you've got little kids around. And you probably still want to see your kids. So how are you going to see your kids and study for the bar exam?
Yeah, and I think this can be a big one around the holidays for the February bar. If you are going to be spreading out your study time for several months, well, that's going to overlap with things like Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's Eve. So obviously you can celebrate these holidays and you should enjoy them and take time off and that kind of thing, but you do have to be realistic about it.
Yeah, exactly. This is also another great area where once you are being realistic, you've got to ask for help and be, thoughtful when you talk to your partner and really sit down and evaluate, what you can get help with. Because it's also possible that maybe you can get people to step up to lighten some of these life commitments. But you're going to have to plan for that.
Yeah. And this is also one of those areas, if you don't really sort of talk it out and plan for it in advance, it's going to be a source of enormous stress, which is not going to be helpful. So figure it out beforehand.
Yeah. All right. Tip number 6 is one of our favorites. You got to study smart.
Yes. This applies to anyone who's a repeat taker, but I think especially if you're going to be working and studying, this is probably not an example of when you should just be doing kind of the same thing you did the first time and expect things to go differently. Listening to lectures passively is probably not a great use of your time. So I think you have to be strategic here, focus on practice, whether it's for the MBE or for the essay or performance test, and really look at what's heavily tested. So, there are outlines that you can get that show you what's heavily tested. We have the Brainy Bar Bank tool where everything is categorized by legal categories, topic, subtopic. And what that can give you is really a rundown overall and within each category of what is most likely to show up. And I'm not telling you it will show up, but if you have minimal time, you've got to play the odds.
And even for the MBE, the National Conference of Bar Examiners releases for free what they call subject matter outlines, where they tell you where the majority of the questions are coming from. So know that
sounds
stuff.
Kind of valuable.
Yeah, know that stuff. It's like free.
We can put that in the show notes.
Yeah, you don't even have to pay for it. They release a new one, I think, at least every year, if not every time the exam administers. So, you are able to be strategic and study the stuff that's heavily tested. I also think it's important to pare down your study materials if you don't have a lot of time, because if your, let's say, mini review book is 500, 600 pages or so, that is not a mini review, and there's no way you can memorize that for the exam. Sorry. It's not going to happen. So
exactly. And the thing is, you don't actually need to memorize that either. And I think for some people, it's hard to get out of that mindset of like, I have to do this enormous volume of work and that will make me pass. That's not going to make you pass. Most people that we speak to failed, have taken some sort of traditional commercial prep course. And in a lot of cases, they did the majority or all of the work. It is not a guarantee that you're going to pass.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee really that you're going to pass the bar, but I think you have a lot higher odds of passing if you focus on the skills and information that you really, really, really need.
Yeah.
So, it's the 80-20 rule. Like maybe some part of a question is going to come up and it's something you're not that great on. But if you've got every other essay going pretty well and you can get half the law on the one that you're flailing on, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah, I think that's true. So some good study tools for the substantive law that we think can help you kind of do targeted practice are lean sheets, smart bar prep outlines. They do focus on what is the most heavily tested material on the essays especially. And if you're in California, a tool called Bar Essays. Bar Essays has outlines and kind of attack sheets and essay templates that you can study for the essays. It also has banks of real student questions so you can really understand how the answers are graded, which I think is also very valuable. So if you've never checked out those tools, you can definitely check them out. Some people really like critical pass flashcards, but they just focus on the multiple choice portion. So I kind of am a fan of getting materials that cover everything.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people are amazed when they look at these outlines that like, oh, that's actually really all I need.
Yeah.
Because you're used to thinking of it in telephone book stacks on your table, and it's actually like it's like less than 100 pages or whatever it is.
And we've been recording for the podcast some discussions of different essay questions for both the MEE and the California essays. And the way we start these discussions is we cover the law that you need to know to answer the question. And every time I do this, and we've got our writing of the week exercises where we do something similar. It's a bit more in depth. We're doing some of these on the podcast. I'm always shocked at how little law you need to know. Like, I've been doing this
trust me, you don't need to know that much law to pass the
No,
bar.
I mean, oh my gosh, I've been doing
It's a dirty
this for
little
so
secret.
long, and I'm still so surprised. I just did one on wills and trusts, and I'm like, really? That's it? Like, you need to know like a holographic will and what happens if it's an interested witness, and and then you just kind of go through. It's like maybe 8 rules. Like, that's it to answer
And
a
I think
question.
the thing is, the thing is, the more of these questions you look at, you just see the same things over and over. I mean, how many things can you test in community property?
Right.
It's like a 1-page list.
Right.
I mean, it's not, you don't need to know 50 pages of an outline for community property. You need to know that 1 page and be able to apply it.
Exactly. So that's why studying the law really by using the questions and testing yourself makes so much more sense. And by using a tool like our Brainy Bar Bank, where you can go on and say, hey, I need to study wills and trusts. What are the most commonly tested issues that come up in wills and trusts? Memorize those first and then do additional practice to learn the rest of the rules. You're going to have a very high likelihood of seeing the law that you memorized on a wills and trust question.
Yeah, I mean, they can't really come up with that much stuff that's like that novel. There are a limited number of fact patterns that can be tested on the majority of these subjects. It's not like we're creating new law like every day, willy-nilly for the bar exam.
Exactly.
Pretty standard.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think focusing on the most common stuff and making sure you're really solid on that. And then if you have additional time, you can dive into the thing that showed up once 10 years ago. Can't hurt, but probably not going to help.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Our tip number 7 is to use technology. So we've already talked about Adapt-A-Bar. We have talked about the Brainy Bar Bank, which is something that we have on our website. We'll link to that in the show notes. We offer something called the Writing of the Week program, which helps walk you through essays and performance tests. The nice thing about these study materials is they can all be used on the go. So they can be very helpful when you're working and studying, because you oftentimes end up studying in different places. You're studying at your office, you're studying at home, you're studying in the library, maybe you're studying in your car. I mean, I've heard it all. So technology
it follows you where you go.
Yeah, but technology makes it easier because you are able to, use your devices to study and practice in a variety of situations.
Yeah, and another technology tool that I would put in a strong plug for is using something like Trello to keep yourself organized. So we do this for our tutoring students. We make their study schedules. We put them on Trello. It literally has daily or weekly checklists of what you need to be doing. Something like that, taking a little bit of time in the beginning to get organized, I think is going to really pay off in the end, because you don't want to be spending a lot of time thinking about what you need to be working on. You kind of need to decide up front, okay, this week I'm focusing on X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Maybe I'm studying a certain topic area, and then I'm going to do a certain number of MBE questions in that area, and then I'm going to do a certain number of essays in that area, and then I'm going to make a study aid that I can look at a month from now.
Yeah.
That might be an entire week.
Yep.
But, you need to think about that in advance so that when you have that 1 hour, like, oh, okay, I'm going to do, whatever it is, 10 or 20 MBE questions in this topic area. So we've got some samples, I think, that we can point to. We have a post maybe about making a study schedule for yourself.
We do.
Something like that. Yep, we do. Great. We'll link to that.
Yep.
And we have our self-study program where we'll actually make it for you if you want us to. But, getting organized if you're working and studying, I think is one of the most fundamental things you can do to alleviate stress and make sure that you're making actual progress.
Yep. I think that is very, very true. All right. Number 8 on our top 10 list is don't forget to take care of yourself. As I sit here trying not to cough because my allergies are out of control, because right now you can't breathe in San Francisco. In fact, my phone just went off. We're now at purple air quality while we're recording this.
Nice.
So,
well, don't go outside.
I know.
Yeah, well, here we have a thermal inversion that is trapping all the terrible air quality. So I also basically can't go outside.
Yeah.
It's a good thing we're inside recording.
Exactly. It was a good day to schedule this.
Too bad we're both coughing off the mic.
Yes. So, take care of yourself. Ask for help from friends or family with all the things that they can do. So this is help making food, maybe other life responsibilities. If you have a dog, and if you work late studying at the office, you can't walk your dog. Maybe your neighbor will walk your dog or let your dog out. Maybe you can meet friends for a hike instead of going out for a happy hour so you can get outside and get some movement in your body. Whatever you can do to stay healthy and focused. I recently made homemade elderberry syrup to help with the immunity in my household, which was actually
nice. I'm getting on the essential oils. So.
Oh, nice. Yes, I kind of do some of that too. I was dropping peppermint essential oils in the shower the other day.
Nice. Yeah, I've got my lavender sleep oil. And yeah, I mean, maybe this is all completely psychosomatic. I'm totally fine with that as long as it works.
Exactly. So, you do need to still invest in trying to keep your body and mind well, because we already mentioned in this podcast, if you get sick and get derailed, especially when you're working part-time or when you're studying part-time, it can just really tank your study.
Well, and I think these are things that can go into your actual study plan. Taking time out to go to an exercise class or do a yoga class or meditating or whatever it is that will keep you more centered, however it is that you best deal with stress. Planning for these things in your schedule is going to make it much more likely that you arrive at the bar exam feeling kind of okay. I mean, I'm not saying you're feeling great, but you're not feeling like you are just totally burned out. You're not retaining information. You're sick. You're a total stress case. That is not going to improve your odds of passing.
Yep. You also have to pay attention to your mental state. It is very easy to become anxious and burned out when you're working long hours. And I think the pressure to pass, especially when you're working and you know that your job knows that you're studying and things like that, can be very overwhelming. So make sure you have a support set up for that. Maybe it's going to therapy. Maybe it's meditating. Maybe it's talking to a good friend. You might have journaling. Yeah, there can be lots of different ways that you can cope with this, but don't do nothing, because it is really hard and it's emotionally challenging to study for the bar in the best of circumstances. So if you don't have the perfect circumstances to study, it can be even more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just expecting it to be difficult and kind of planning ahead for that is probably your best bet.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I don't think anyone who studies for the bar and works full time gets to the end of it and says, you know what? That was a walk in the park.
I was so prepared.
Yeah.
I nailed it.
I mean, everybody feels like unprepared. Everyone feels anxious and stressed out and tired. And these things are just kind of the way it's going to be. And I think to a certain extent, just accepting that it's probably going to be sort of an unpleasant experience, but you can figure out ways to get through it, is probably a better approach than expecting it to be easy and then being frustrated when it feels frustrating.
Yeah. All right. Number 9 on our top 10 list is to constantly evaluate what is working and remember to focus on practice. So we've talked about this a little bit kind of as we've moved through the podcast, but the reality is you don't have a lot of time to study. So you have to be on top of it and make sure you're not wasting it. So if you are, let's say, retaking your commercial bar review course and you're just listening to a bunch of lectures and that's not how you retain law, stop like today and try something else.
Right. Presumably you already listened to them the first time. So
right, exactly. I think you really do have to just say, is this getting me closer to my goal? If not, drop it and regroup.
Yeah, and I think it can be effective. Say, for example, you realize you're really underwater on a certain topic area. You just never learned this in law school. You never learned it for bar prep. Then it might make sense to go back and do a really deep dive and listen to the lectures carefully and try to figure out what they're talking about and all these things. That totally makes sense. Just listening to them randomly for subject areas that you're doing pretty okay in is not a good use of your time.
No. I just stop and try something else. In fact, we were just talking within our team this morning about an article that I came across, ironically, on my son's school's Facebook page. But they were talking about using drawing techniques and how there's a lot of study out there right now that are showing that that's the best way to learn. And I was just thinking about bar prep and the fact that that's not how most bar prep is designed. And because we don't really interact with the material, we just kind of passively are supposed to absorb it. So, you don't have to do it the way everybody else is doing it. If it's not working for you, do something different.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody cares how you prepare for the bar exam.
Yep.
They only care if you write down enough correct information to pass.
Yeah.
So, you can get out colored pencils and do drawings. I mean, I did all of that kind of thing. I have a design background that made sense to me.
Right.
People gave me a hard time in law school. No one really cared when I was studying for the bar because I was studying by myself. But, in law school, people gave me a really hard time for making drawings on my flashcards to remember the case. So I felt very vindicated when you sent that article out today about how making a drawing is the best way to remember and understand a concept.
And the other thing I think that is important to think about is what were you doing in law school that really resonated with you? Because my husband, who was not my husband at the time of the bar and likes to remind me that he's proud of himself for staying with me when I studied for the bar because I was a little stressed out. But I remember coming home one day and just being completely freaked out because somebody else was commenting on that they were studying more than I was studying, that they were studying a different way than I was studying. And I had just worked myself up into a tizzy. And, he's not a lawyer. And he was just like, didn't you do better in law school than that guy? And I was like, well, yeah. He goes, why do you care? Why aren't you doing what you did in law school that worked? I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, then enough, but he's like, why are we talking about this? But it was such a simple idea. But I think oftentimes we just throw out the things we know that are effective for this idea of what bar prep is supposed to be. And that's a huge mistake.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just feel like, well, I paid this money and these people are going to tell me what to do. And, frankly, a lot of the people we talk to admit at some point, like, well, I kind of realized it wasn't actually working for me. But by then it was too late to do anything else. So I think that's one of the reasons, one of the luxuries, if we can say that, of working and studying is if you're starting earlier, you can figure out, you have more time to figure out what's going to work for you.
Yeah.
So you can try, in the beginning, maybe you try a few different options and then you test yourself and you see, okay, well, this one was more effective in me retaining and understanding this information when I did the essay. So I'm going to do more of that type of thing.
Yeah.
So, I don't think you want to be experimenting like a few weeks before the exam, but if you have, say 4 months, you can do a little bit of experimentation in the beginning and really see what it is that's going to work for you.
Yep. All right. Our last tip is the one that no one wants to do is talk to your boss. Nobody wants to do that one. Talk to your boss or HR and try and get time off if possible. It might be embarrassing having to talk to the leadership of your work, whether or not you're in a law firm or not, about having to retake the exam, but you need to talk to them so you can set yourself up for success to do this. So this can be the time off that we've discussed before the exam, but even if it's just a few days, it can be taking Fridays off, maybe working 40 hours in 4 days and then taking a Friday off. So you have another full day of study.
Or maybe working from home a couple of days, something like that.
Yeah. You can get creative, but none of these solutions are going to be available for you if you don't just suck it up and have the conversation with your boss. And I think you'll feel better after you do it, but trying to do this in secret or without telling people around you what's going on is really hard and emotionally exhausting. So I think it's just better off to be honest about it and help other people set you up for success.
Well, by the time you're studying, presumably your work knows if you've passed the bar or not.
Right.
So, it's not like it's a big secret. They can typically go look it up. Hopefully you haven't lied to anyone about passing already. That would be a very bad idea. We do not recommend that. And I think it's helpful, like I said earlier, when you go into that meeting, you're prepared with some type of plan. And that plan might be things you need from them, or it might even just be like, this is my plan for how I'm going to pass, because it's going to make you look a lot more responsible. And people understand that, things happen. Maybe you didn't pass the first time. Nobody's going to think badly of you really because of this. They just want to hear what it is that you're going to do that hopefully is going to get you to pass the next time.
Agreed. All right. Well, with that, I think we're out of time. I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you're still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or allison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.